In the mid-20th century, we began launching satellites into space that would help us determine the exact circumference of the Earth, 40,030 kilometers. But over 2,000 years earlier in ancient Greece, a man arrived at nearly that exact same figure by putting a stick in the ground. That man was Eratosthenes, a Greek mathematician and the head of the Library of Alexandria. Eratosthenes had heard that in Syene, a city to the south of Alexandria, no vertical shadows were cast at noon on the summer solstice. The sun was directly overhead. He wondered if this were also true in Alexandria, so on June 21st he planted a stick vertically in the ground and waited to see if a shadow would be cast at noon. It turns out there was one, and it measured about 7 degrees. Now, if the sun's rays are coming in at the same angle at the same time of day, and a stick in Alexandria is casting a shadow while a stick in Syene is not, it must mean that the Earth's surface is curved. And Eratosthenes probably already knew that. The idea of a spherical Earth was floated by Pythagoras around 500 BC and validated by Aristotle a couple centuries later. If the Earth really was a sphere, Eratosthenes could use his observations to estimate the circumference of the entire planet. Since the difference in shadow length is 7 degrees between Alexandria and Syene, that means the two cities are 7 degrees apart on Earth's 360-degree surface. Eratosthenes hired a man to pace the distance between the two cities, and learned they were 5,000 stadia apart, which is about 800 kilometers. He could then use simple proportions to find the Earth's circumference. 7.2 degrees is 1/50th of 360 degrees, so 800 kilometers times 50 equals 40,000 kilometers. And just like that, a man 2,200 years ago found the circumference of the entire planet with just a stick and his brain.
Let's go. We're ready to launch. You ready, Craig?
James, how are you?
Okay.
Okay, so what's happening here right now?
Okay, this is the boat-based target. It's horizontal stripes. We're going to launch a small boat out into the water here with a striped target. Come on, Betty! And as it gets farther and farther out, you'll start to lose the stripes.
One way that Aristotle proved 2,000 years ago that the Earth is a sphere was with a boat test very similar to this one. As a boat approaches the horizon, it appears to slowly dip down into the water before disappearing completely. That's got everything to do with the curvature of the Earth. If the planet was flat, the entire boat would remain visible.
So it'll be a very visual depiction of the curvature of the Earth.
Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today we're looking at the truth about Columbus and the round Earth. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, with a whole lot of maps and information about the very round Earth. Contrary to popular belief, not only did Columbus realize the world was round, so did his contemporaries. In fact, it was so well accepted that daring seafarers had been exploring the Atlantic for hundreds of years before Columbus's time. Without a doubt, men of the early Renaissance knew the world was round, and that the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were in no danger of sailing over the edge of the world. The ancients were well aware that the world was a sphere. In Christian medieval Europe, Bede, from the 7th century CE, a scholar and a Catholic monk, produced an influential treatise that included a discussion of the spherical nature of the world. The work, The Reckoning of Time, was copied and distributed to clerics across the Carolingian Empire. Later in the 1300s, Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy also describes the Earth as a sphere.
Did medieval Christians believe in a flat Earth? No, but the story is quite useful for making Christians look stupid, because Christianity was the dominant social force at the time. Here's another way we could pose the question. Were you taught in school that religion-induced ignorance made Europeans think Earth was flat until Columbus came around in 1492, who showed otherwise? That's actually a myth. The truth is, there were many great arguments for a spherical Earth before 1492, and they were taught in the university, a Christian invention. Consider this argument. Here we have our planet, its North Pole, and the equator. Medieval Christians understood that if one were to stand on the North Pole and look directly overhead, you would see the North Star. That's why it's called the North Star. If you were to stand on the equator, you would have to look along your horizon or on your horizon to see that same star in the sky. Between the equator and the pole, there are a range of angles that you would have to look up from your horizon to see Polaris. And this proves that the Earth has at least a north-south curvature. Medieval university students could make this argument effectively for a spherical Earth, but many of us today have no idea that this proves the Earth is curved. Over many years of teaching astronomy, I've had my students role-play two different viewpoints, the flat Earth viewpoint and the round Earth viewpoint, and make arguments for each side. And it's surprising that many students today have a hard time arguing for a spherical Earth, but can pull out the usual arguments for a flat Earth. Well, it looks flat, right? And things like that. Well, it turns out that medieval students could make a much better argument for a spherical Earth than many students today. So maybe they weren't that ignorant after all.
The Catholics, they weren't the only religious sect that thought that the world was round. The Islamic world is known to have consistently maintained the scientific knowledge of the Greeks and Romans, preserving the works of Aristotle and Ptolemy, among others. They were well aware that the Earth was round, having calculated with relatively good precision its circumference in the early 9th century. As historian Geoffrey Burton Russell stated, "With extraordinary few exceptions, no educated person in the history of Western civilization from the 3rd century BC onward believed that the Earth was flat." Now, as to how the myth that people during medieval times thought the Earth was flat came about, this is up for debate. The idea seems to have first popped up in the 17th century and appears to have been, at least in part, put forth by secular scientists railing against the ignorance and misguided notions of religious groups, specifically Catholics. They claimed that these people in medieval times believed that the world was flat. Their belief in this lacks any evidence, and in fact there's quite a lot of evidence to the contrary, as we previously mentioned. The myth gained significant traction in the 19th century with various works such as Andrew Dickson White's History of the Warfare of Science with Theology. The Columbus flat Earth myth itself was widely popularized by Washington Irving's The Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus, which was in numerous places largely fiction, though presented as fact and a scholarly work. In his account, Irving claimed that it was Columbus's voyage that proved to the world that the Earth was round, going so far as to explicitly state that one of the objections to Columbus's voyage was that a round Earth wasn't scriptural, so the voyage was doomed to fail when Columbus encountered the edge of the world. In fact, there is no such record of any such objection to Columbus's expedition, with the primary documented objections having to do with the length of the journey. Irving's fanciful tale is simply in line with the warfare of science with theology viewpoint, which, at least in terms of the flat Earth versus spherical Earth issue, historically wasn't ever a sticking point, as has been so often claimed from the 17th century on. However, around the mid-20s, most scholars stopped believing this myth. One of the only Christian works that seems to put forward the notion of a flat Earth was written by an Egyptian monk in the 6th century AD. This book was called Christian Topography. On the whole, though, evidence seems to indicate this work wasn't very influential, as you might expect, given that most educated Christians were well aware of the mountain of evidence that the world was a sphere. That being said, Christian Topography was often cited as support for the notion that Christians thought the world was flat until recently, with these authors casually ignoring all of the evidence to the contrary.
I'm ready. Bring it up.
So it's starting?
Yeah.
Okay, so the test is starting. It's starting right now.
At first, all the stripes are clearly visible. But sure enough, as the boat reaches the horizon, the stripes begin to disappear one by one.
It's pretty amazing. You can actually see it pretty clearly with this camera here. And you see that the red stripe that was at the bottom has completely disappeared, and it's now getting closer to sort of the middle green stripe, that is.
So we've lost about 1.5 stripes.
Right. So this can only happen, why?
Because of the curvature of the Earth. So here's what we were shooting.